Okay, we're doing a recording for the... What are we going to call this? The Tales of Aedoran campaign, part 2, campaign recap. So the last part we got to was the party had uncovered a plot to have one of the royal family members assassinated that governs the westernmost province, which is the province of Cardine, which is governed by the royal Cardine family. After some investigation and some digging around, the city of Kincardine realizes and learns very quickly that the potential victim of the assassination was to be either Lord Cardine himself or his daughter, Princess Allura. Some sleuthing and investigation, and it is uncovered that the queen, Lady Genevieve Cardine, had hired a group known as the Order of the Black Viper to assassinate her stepdaughter, Princess Allura. That way, her son, Prince Maximilian, could take the throne whenever he came of age. This attempt was thwarted quickly by the party, who laid an ambush for the ambush, in which there was a banquet that was going to be held for Lord's nephew, who had died several days prior. The assassins had laid an ambush, disguising themselves as servers. Though with some keen perception, the party was able to uncover which of the servers just happened to be the assailants. And once the ambush from the assassins took place, the party was ready to counter ambush, in which they hatched a very elaborate plan, and they executed that plan perfectly. The princess and Lord Cardine was safe, and Lady Genevieve, the queen, was ousted for her involvement in the assassination attempt. Furious with this, Lord Cardine dragged her to the city square where typically public executions were held, and tied her to one of the posts that most people are burned at the stake, and begun to interrogate her as to her motivations behind the attempted assassination. And he did not like what he was told, and he was attempting to garner some information about who she had hired, and she was very reluctant to say. And just as she's about to spill the beans in a moment of, I'm going to tell you this before you kill me anyway, she was shot in the chest with another black-shafted, black-tipped, black-fletched arrow from an unknown position. The arrow itself had a note attached to it, and Lord Cardine takes the note and reads, "Your contract has been terminated." Has the same black ink or black wax stamp that the party had found on the body of the nephew of Lord Cardine and on the alchemist who had been brewing their poisons. A few days go by, the party's able to reconstitute themselves after the fight, do some shopping. They return to Lord Cardine, where Lord Cardine gives them two objectives: to look for his lost son, because after the murder of his mother, the prince had fled the castle and hasn't been seen since. So Lord Cardine asks the party for help again, locating his son, and also an order to head north to a nearby village, an old forward operating base from the eastern province, which has been long abandoned, has seen several adventuring parties go in and not return. A village to the south where patrons of a local tavern had been going missing outside of the tavern itself, being whisked away almost as if vanishing into thin air. So the party accepts both of these, all while keeping an eye out for the Lord's son, Maximilian. So they head north and investigate this ruined fort. When the party arrives, the walls have been completely overtaken. Vines and kudzu and all sorts of verdant life has engulfed the exterior, not giving too much leeway as to where a proper entrance would be. But after a little bit of sleuthy investigation, they find a vine-covered entrance. But instead of barging straight in, they decide to scale the wall, and what they see, a recent fight between goblins and kobolds, remaining group of goblins who are just resting after an assault. But they exterminate the goblins on the exterior. They move into the fort to find it is essentially ransacked. It's being lived in by kobolds, which goblins are attempting to take. So after some exploration, they find that there is a locked chamber further into the fort itself, kind of down toward like the basement area. They backtrack through and deal with some giant spiders that happen to be guarding a key that is needed to get into the room. They retrieve the key and head back down to the locked room, where it seems like a horde of adventurers' gear had been stowed away that was rusted and decayed beyond repair. There happened to be a single solitary door at the edge with kind of like a pull lever to open the door. The lever is pulled and the gate that they came through slams shut, and this gas gets released, and they all fail their wisdom saving throws and fall asleep. They are transported to a very bizarre area where it's essentially a desert, but there are forest trees that are protruding out of the sand itself when they should have no business being there. Rocky spires off in the distance, vague, almost arcane looking rocky spires, and this huge like forest wall that is flanking this massive what looks to be a large tiger skull with the jaw open. Stepping out of the maw, which is essentially just a large cave mouth, is a chimera. They deal battle with the chimera and defeat it, and once the chimera is defeated, it explodes, and they into this kind of similar gas that they had inhaled before, and their vision darkens, and then they all awake back in the room that they were in, completely fine, but the door that they were attempting to go through is now open, and sitting in there is a treasure hoard with a inside of a small glass box is a very uniquely decorated ring, which upon further inspection, the jewels that had encrusted the outside of the ring are not jewels at all, but eyes that seem to follow humanoids that surround it. Happened to be a ring that had some negative effects, but it was attuned to, and the wearer, which was Thasmin, the cleric, the dwarf cleric, had some pretty negative thoughts, we'll just call it that. But he resisted and decided not to let the negative thoughts sway him into doing anything rash, so the party had no reason to suspect that any foul play has been taking place. Let's fast forward a bit. They return to Kincardine, retrieve their reward for solving the problem with the adventurers going missing, which just happened to be a trapped fort filled with goblins and kobolds. And then they head south to the village of Arkala, which is a shore-based fishing village where their main import is various types of exotic fish, and it's a large trade post where ships come in and out all the time. Again, it's about another 3 to 4 day travel down to Arkala. On a day 2, during the night's watch, the barbarian of the party decides to go on a late night hunt. She ends up in a meadow, a legitimate, like a physical run-in with a female vampire who was just recently turned, but a few months prior. She was being pursued by 3 other vampires, explained that their task was to retrieve her and take her back home. Party not knowing where home is, and the female vampire being very not compliant, not wanting to return. The barbarian stepped between the female vampire and her pursuers, initiating combat. It seemed to be going the vampire's way until the sun was just starting to peak over the distant horizon, and they decided to flee to live and fight another day, perhaps, and left the party with several questions. Who was it that was chasing her? Why were they chasing her? What was her name? Which the questions were all answered. This female vampire's name is Amara. She seemingly to be in her early 20s as far as human age comparison. Early 20s, kind of short, almost bob cut black hair, kind of hangs almost down to the shoulders, bright red eyes. She explains that her village was ransacked by a sect of vampires whose leader is a very old, ancient, powerful vampire who, for the last several years, has been just slowly making his way to... I heard you guys. Making his way to village, essentially burning places down and turning people who he wants in his community. She explains to the party that this powerful old vampire had essentially burned her village to the ground, and instead of killing her along with her parents and siblings, decided to turn her and try to recruit her into his community. She had yet to feed on human blood and refused to do so, and resorted to feeding on animals, livestock, things of that nature. But she finally decided to escape and was on the run for several weeks before bumping into the party themselves. And she also has asked if they would assist her in looking for a cure for vampirism. There was rumors that she had heard that there is a cure, and unfortunately, she didn't know any details. However, with a nice history roll, Dawn, the wood elf druid, and that she herself had read somewhere, in some book, somewhere, she couldn't recall which book and where, but she recalled that there was indeed a cure for this vampirism, and it just happened to be a guarded secret that is only known by this nameless hermit that lives in a forest somewhere. But that's about all she could recall with the role that she had. They tag along and head down to Arkala to investigate these disappearances outside of this inn. Fast forward a bit, they get to Arkala and they ask around the town, ask the local guards, which were very few, the innkeep, several civilians, about anything weird that has been happening over the past couple weeks. And obviously they mention the disappearances, but they also mention that some of them vanished into thin air. However, there were bodies that were retrieved and one survivor of an attack, and they were being looked at the guard post that is down on the docks by the ocean. They investigate these corpses that are being autopsied by a coroner who is also taking care of a recent victim who just narrowly escaped, and investigates the bodies. The bodies themselves smell of alcohol. They reek of cheap booze, as does the recent victim, who explains that when she was attacked, she was piss drunk. All of her jewelry, her bracelets, her necklace had been ripped off in the attack, left large bruises around her neck and her wrist, and there was a large claw slash across like the top shoulder that had torn a large portion of her blouse, to where and some flayed skin was hanging off that was being looked at by the medic slash coroner. So the party hatches a brilliant idea to get one of their own plastered and to walk around the outside of the tavern where the previous victim said that she was attacked. So essentially, the party's gonna get one of their own drunk and flaunt around outside. Sounds perfect. So the party gets the vast majority of the townsfolk together at the tavern. That way the guards can keep an eye on them. They come up with this plan with the guards that we're gonna get everybody inside the tavern. You just make sure no one leaves. And the guards are like, cool, got it. I'm obviously paraphrasing, because if I went through every detail, this video would be hours long. So I'm hitting bullet points here. So they decide to get the bard of the group, Tom Bombadil, who is, if you don't recall, is dressed like Cicero from Skyrim, except with like Joaquin Phoenix Joker face paint, essentially. He decides to be the bartender and start serving everyone drinks and drinking heavily himself. Once he becomes to the point of inebriation, our druid takes the form of a mastiff and escorts him outside as to give him some form of protection while the rest of the party lies in wait in an ambush spot. They had planned to have the bard Tom, Mr. Bombadil, take a stroll through a set of nearby residential houses that had a very narrow alleyway between them, where they could all kind of post up either in separate alleys or on rooftops. Plans going according, Tom gets pissed drunk and begins to flaunt outside. As the party continues on the inside, the sounds of music and laughter and drinks can be heard from inside the tavern. Amara is the first, being a vampire herself, to catch like the blur of speed that is stalking Tom. And just as she alerts Ruse, the rogue, the changeling rogue in the party, Tom is swept up off of his feet almost in a flash. But Tom, being as dexterous as he is able to just barely squirm out of this creature's grasp. And they both tumble to the ground, but the creature quickly gets up and reveals itself now in the full front of the moonlight. I'll put a picture up if I've got one. Some of you that play The Witcher 3 might know what this is. It's a Catacan, which is just the model I use for this vampire. It's kind of a lesser vampire, more feral, more animalistic, less person-like. But they do battle with this vampire. I should say lesser vampire. And just as they get it to nearly dead, it hops up on the roof of one of the buildings and lets out a very large, alarming screech and begins to dart into the forest. Spade, our Azamar sorcerer, decides to tail him with the use of Thunderstep and launches the perfectly placed fireball to bring this thing to 0 hit points, which at this point they've already gone 300 to 400 feet into the forest. And what Spade sees as the rest of the party slowly joins him is a large open barn, 50, 60 feet wide, 30 or 40 feet tall. Just a large, what looks to be maybe a place where they would store grain or crops that would take a long time to spoil. But it looks to be like a barn or a storage house of sorts with these huge, large, swinging doors that, when is noticed by the sorcerer Spade, are moving. The doors are swinging like something had just recently come out of them. And it's at this point everyone gathers up together and kind of puts their backs and begins to scan the perimeter, and they do notice that they are being surrounded. Before any of them can think, Tom is swept up again off of his feet. Being the one who is drunk, he is swept up off of his feet before the party's very eyes and taken into the barn itself, causing them to decide whether to chase or to await a secondary attack. Several of them decide to chase. And Tom wakes up in this dark room, but there's another entity in this room. It's not the vampire, but a separate one. Voice rings out and calls, "Who are you?" This is where we meet another player who jumped into the campaign a little bit later. His character name is Shaco. He's a bugbear barbarian who has been chained and subdued to the wall, and it is later revealed that the vampires used him as sort of a blood bag. They would drain him to near death and then allow him several days to recover to sate their appetite. Tom quickly frees him as Alviria, the party's original barbarian, who is enlarged with a spell, comes crashing through the wall, creating a separate doorway. And they all become descended upon by the other 3 vampires that are lying in wait. They do battle. Amara is thrown out of a window and is impaled on a broken tree branch. So she was out of the fight. The party swiftly gangs up on all the vampires. It was a closer fight than I had initially anticipated. They did pretty well. After the dust settles and they gather themselves, they notice that Amara is missing. And when they go to look, she is kind of like, 6-7 feet up in the air, but she has a tree branch probably about 5 inches in diameter that is just protruding through her abdomen. They pull her off the tree, and she's lost so much blood that she is now almost in a feral state. Successfully made several wisdom saving throws as to not eat one of the members of the party. The Warforged fighter had the quick idea to take her inside where there were several animal corpses that could be fed on. But she satiates her hunger, and they question their newest member of the party, which is Shaco, the Bugbear Barbarian. He discloses that he was down here on business looking for a vampire that has been ransacking and raiding villages. And unfortunately, this isn't the one that he's looking for. And while he was investigating, he was snatched up by these lesser vampires and held in captivity until the party arrived. After all this, they decide on what steps are next, which is to return to Kincardine, turn in the quest, get their reward, and then see if they can do any more research on this cure for vampirism to try to help their vampire NPC friend Amara. So they sleep on the beach, and upon waking the next morning, Shaco the Barbarian is gone. He has disappeared into the night. So they take a few days, they gather some supplies, what little supplies that they can. They return to Kincardine to turn in their quest, get a little bit of cash, and Thasmin, Amara go check out the archive along with Alviria, the Cardine archive, which is essentially like a vast library of knowledge. And they spend several hours in there researching anything to do with vampirism and the anatomy of vampires, the biology of vampires, anything to do with vampires and or cures thereof. After hours of searching, they find a very detailed journal of an individual known as Harland Urmas, who, after reading his journal, it seems to be kind of like an autobiography, keeping the reader up to date on the adventures of Harland and his adventuring party. They were searching for a cure for vampirism themselves. After skimming through Harland's journal, they find an entry that mentions Harland and his party finding the cure, learning that it is a ritual. And after this revelation, there is an entry that details the slaughter of Harland's adventuring party by an old, powerful vampire, essentially wiped out his party basically with the flick of his wrist. So what Harlan does is he goes into hiding and begins to continue his search for knowledge about a cure for vampirism. He finds the cure and knows how to perform it. Very shortly after is approached by another vampire who seeks the cure. And there's a passage that details the intensity of the ritual itself. The next passage details the success. The final entry details Harland accepting his old age. This is 15 years after, and that he will be passing the torch and all the information onto the vampire who he cured in the beginning, and he will be left with Harland's legacy. And at the very bottom of that page, there's a footnote in a separate handwriting urging whoever's reading this, and if they seek the cure, to come to the base of the Aedoran peaks and seek a log cabin made out of white ash. And the Aedoran peaks are to the southeast of a town known as Carningsby. So the party, knowing this, decide to head to Carningsby to see if they can fetch any more information about the local area around that spot and maybe figure out kind of pinpoint where this ash cabin may be. Fast forward, it's a 6-day travel to Carningsby from Kincardine. On day 4, through the night's watch, they are accosted by 4 vampires and a much older vampire and introduces himself to be Draven. Draven, who I will post on the screen now, you will also recognize him if you've played The Witcher, hasn't come to fight per se, but just wants information and casts some kind of spell on Amara, digging through her brain for something. And once he seems to have gotten what he came for, he disappears into the night, leaving his 4 vampire minions to fight the party, caught off guard in the middle of the night. The party narrowly survives and recuperates and questions Amara on what he was digging for. Amara details some of the specifics that she knows. Party kind of puts 2 and 2 together, and the old powerful vampire from Harland Ermasa's journal who wiped out his party and kept him in hiding sounds a lot like Draven. So they correctly assume that this is the same vampire as it is. They have to kind of talk their way into the city limits or the town limits, because it seems like the local government, who is not Cardinian in nature, even though they reside within the province of Cardine, there are no Cardinian banners that fly in Carningsby. However, it is this other type of organization that seems to have seated themselves as the local authorities. But upon entering the town, they gather some intel about things that have been going on in the town, and they heard rumors about a recent collapse in the mine shaft. Carningsby sits on top of a massive silver deposit, and their main export just happens to be silver. And there was a collapse in the silver mine recently, and there unfortunately are workers that are trapped underneath. So the party, being the lawful good people they are, decide to step in and investigate and see if they can save any of these people. Well, at the very entrance of the kind of the elevator shaft that takes you down into the mines itself stands Shaco, the bugbear barbarian who had disappeared from the village of Arkala after being saved by the party not but a week and a half prior. They question him about where he went, and he just kind of responds that he has, he had been called back to Carningsby to deal with the collapsed mine shaft problem. So Amara decides to go to the local library or place of bookage to research and try to pinpoint exactly where this old hermit that lives in this ash cabin might be, instead of having this huge area to try to cover, have kind of like a more pinpoint location. So the party descends down into this silver mine, and some of these mine shafts stretch for miles. And this is just one entrance to the shaft, like to the mine shaft. This is just one entrance to the mine. And it's just this super deep cavern where the party has to kind of fit themselves into this steel cage that is slowly like cranked down with a chain and pulley system. Probably somewhere around like 6 to 800 feet below the surface. The party gets down there and ignites their light sources. I believe Ruse, the arcane trickster rogue, uses dancing lights to illuminate the caverns themselves. And after some sleuthing, they have several different tunnels to choose from, and they all kind of decide which ones to go through. They initially hear the very soft cries of help coming from one of the tunnels, and Tom Bombadil, the bard, rushes, just immediately bolts down that tunnel, and the party follows in tow. And they after walking through some of the tunnels that wind a bit, they find themselves in a slightly larger area, larger chamber, where there seems to be a humanoid of some kind. Maybe looked to be a dwarf or a gnome that was slowly kind of crawling toward the party and was just very silently asking for help. And as the party approached, shards of dirt and rock explode from 3 different sides of this chamber, where these like underground tunnel digging monsters that I will throw on screen right now, bouillettes, I think they're called, much smaller in stature to normal ones. These might be like adolescent bouillettes, but bouillettes all the same come crashing out of the ground, slinging rocks and dirt and dust everywhere, causing the caverns to shake. And they deal battle with these things, narrowly escaping, taking a short rest to heal up. They escort this dwarf back to the cage, the elevator cage that brought them up, and they send him back up to safety. They decide to traverse a separate tunnel, where they finally come upon the area where the main mine shaft collapsed happened. They can see just beyond like this massive mound of rocks and rubble, just like the faintest flicker of torchlight beyond. And just as they begin to pick up rocks and start moving them, throwing them about haphazardly, making lots of noise, 2 more of these adolescent bouillettes burst out of the ground and almost have them in a pincer position where they are flanked on both sides. And that is where we had left off the last session. So, at this point, dear viewer, you are basically caught up to where we are in the campaign, with some minor details withheld, because like I said, if we went into the details of everything that the party did at every moment in time, this video would be hours long. But now that we are caught up, I should be able to give you detailed descriptions of each session more often, instead of having to encapsulate multiple sessions into one video. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you guys who like D&D get some kind of kick out of this, and out of the antics of my players, who did finally name their party, but for copyright purposes, we're just going to call them Mox Vakana. If you can't tell, several of them are fans of Critical Role, myself included. But with that being said, that's the campaign wrap-up for right now. And I will see you guys on the next campaign wrap-up, and I hope that you enjoyed yourself. See you guys. Bye!